other duties as we speak. He's working, but not with us.
I see Jean Marie and I don't see Betsy, but everyone else. Okay,
Betsy's not able to join us either.
great. All right, then we're all accounted for.
All right, Richard, just wait a moment while I get the live stream.
Okay.
Okay, we're good to go.
All right. Well, we'll call this committee to order. Tody, do you want to take the roll call?
Mike Stevenson,
Yes.
Allison Bristol,
Here.
Mary Starr,
Here.
Annalee Rosenblatt,
Here,
Karen Shute,
Here.
Mike Wood,
Here.
Board of Education Rep Leanne Casalonis,
Here.
and Counselor Jean Marie Caterina, and Acting Chair Richard Silkman.
I'm here.
Thank
Okay. The next item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes. I'm assuming that everybody got copies of them. You have a motion to approve them?
So moved.
Thank you, Mary. Second.
I'll second that.
Thanks, Mike. Is there any discussion about the minutes?
who made the motion, please?
Mary.
I
Mary, okay. And who seconded it? That went so fast. I wasn't ready.
Mike.
Mike,
Mike
okay.
Wood.
Wood, all right. He did it last time too, so. Good old Mike.
Good for something, huh? No, Tody, do you want to call the roll?
Ouch.
Mike Stevenson,
Yes.
Allison Bristol,
Yes.
Mary Starr,
Yes.
Annalee Rosenblatt,
Yes,
Karen Shute,
Yes.
Mike Wood,
Yes.
and Richard Silkman.
Yes.
Thank you.
The next item are public comments. I don't know if there's anybody here from the public. I don't see anybody, but Tom, do you know if anybody's showing up?
I don't see any attendees at this point.
Okay, then we'll close the public comment session and then move on to the meat of the agenda, which is hopefully to finish up on our review of the charter document. Just to refresh people from where we left off last time, we had tabled a number of items under Article 5. There was some additional language in Section 907 that is subject to, was under consideration, and we need to go back over. And then I think there are a couple of items still outstanding in Articles 9 and 10, or maybe just 10, that we have to just work our way through. I don't think they're very controversial, but we'll know when we get there. So what I'd like to do is start by turning everybody's attention to the revised Article 5 that Tody sent along.
Yeah, I'm trying to find that so I can share it. Tody, was it part of the agenda in the?
No,
working
it was
document?
a separate email.
Does someone have that handy? And if you do, please share your screen with it.
it came later.
Thought I had it up, but I don't, sorry.
Well, I probably got it. Can I share?
Sure, anyone can. If not, I'll make sure you can. Yeah, for some reason, I'm just having trouble finding it.
I should have it right here, but I don't.
So I found it. So do I click on it to open it and then share it?
Yeah.
I just sent it along to you with
Okay.
easier if you just grab it there and
Yep. Thank you.
you
Okay.
see it.
All right,
Okay, there we go.
excuse the delay.
the first changes that the subcommittee, and that's Annalee, myself, and we were assisted by Tom when we met and went over the items that were tabled. The first item related to generally the notion of a capital budget and incorporating a capital budget into this article. And I think where we got to was the level of detail that the subcommittee had originally proposed seemed a little bit over the top and in many respects too constraining and not applicable to what the town's process currently is. So what we have done is we've made some modifications to that original submission that we gave to you, but that incorporates the notion of physical assets, a capital plan, a capital assessment, and a capital budget. And we've done it with the red lines that we're going to walk through now. So that whole section 502, which was a red line section in the previous draft, that gets deleted and replaced by the language that is showing up here now. And so we have added to 502.1.1 clarifications as to what an exact statement of the financial condition of the town is. So that's the original language. And what we've said is that that statement of the financial condition of the town shall include an assessment of the condition of the physical assets owned, operated, managed, or otherwise utilized by the town, and the ability of those physical assets to meet the current and future requirements of the town, consistent with generally accepted accounting and audit standards. So rather than have a formal capital budget or plan, what we've said is that the town manager will present a statement of the financial condition of the town, which includes that laid out there. Are there any questions about that? I know it's, it's new and maybe some of you are seeing it for the first time if you didn't have a chance to look at Tody's email earlier.
Mike Wood has a question.
Mike?
Yeah, thank you, Richard. Yeah, I think it's good language, certainly. Through the chair, I'd like to ask Tom, how do you see this working in what you've been accustomed to, Tom? Is this a major change in how you present the financial condition of the town to the council?
No, I don't think so. Other than it does include, the capital assets of the town. As a practical matter, I believe the budgets in modern history that I've been producing generally meet this standard already. So that was a fair amount of our discussion. So no, I don't see this as overly burdensome.
Okay, thank you for that. And the other thing is, when we speak of terms such as assessment of condition, et cetera, are there like terms that are generally accepted? What are we talking about? Good, fair, excellent? Are we getting more exacting in these conditions, or?
Well, I think there's certainly some interpretation that will have to be used here. And I think that flexibility is something I'll work with future councils with. Some may want additional detail, but this is the charter. I think this lays out the general expectation. The finer detail and actually how it's executed, I think, is going to evolve over time.
So you find this to be not overly burdensome and yet not overly exacting, where it's not something you can work with fairly easily.
Correct.
Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you, Richard.
Sure thing, Mike. Are there any other questions about this? What I'd like to do is not vote on each of these items separately yet, because there are other aspects of this notion of the capital plan and budget that are in some of this other red line. And I'd like to be able to hit all of those and then go back and look at it in its entirety. Okay. The next item is 502.1.2. And this, the language here incorporates two things. One is the notion of the capital plan. The second is the issue about gifts and contributions to non-governmental organizations. But in the first part of the language, the budget will include an itemized statement of appropriations recommended for current expenses and for permanent improvements. That's the current language. And then we've added and an itemized list of capital investments recommended for the next 5 years. So it's looking forward to what capital investments are going to have to be made over the next 5 years. Of course, those would not be made in the current year, but they would give the budget a little bit of a forward look. And we thought that 5 years was a reasonable balance between a long-term perspective and just the current year budget. The second sentence is already current. It showed up as red line, but I think it's in the current charter now, where it says the statement shall present comparative statements in parallel columns of projected expenditures for the current year and actual expenditures for the most recent audited fiscal year. That's already in the charter. Then the last sentence is the sentence that we addressed with respect to charitable contributions, donations. And here we've said that they're not prohibited, which was the way in which we ended up voting last time, but that you want to see an itemized list of those broken out in the budget. And so that's what this sentence does. And then the very last sentence, an increase or decrease in any item shall be indicated by a dollar amount and percentage change. That is current language. Again, it's showing up as red line, but it probably shouldn't be.
Yeah, so Tony, should these proposals pass, what I've just highlighted is actual existing language, so it should not show as change. I can work with you on that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just change it to black right now.
Sure, it's what I received, so I just
Yeah.
wanted to
No,
get it. Sure, yep. We'll get it changed.
I think it's a PDF, so I can't change it that easily.
I have a Word. I have the Word. I can do it. Mhm.
Well, we'll get it right. I mean, it's just a clerical thing at that point. Are there any questions on 502.1.2 for clarification purposes or any discussion around that, around the language? Allison, I see your hand up, and then Mary.
Yeah, I was just going to say the second full sentence that starts with any cash contributions that Tom had highlighted.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, that's new. So
You're right. I beg your pardon.
that's okay.
Yep.
Mary?
I guess I just wanted to know kind of the reasoning with this 5-year capital investment. I guess I'm concerned that it could constrain the council and the town manager and staff in a way that, okay, this is what the plan was, and oh, if you don't go according to this plan, and then, I mean, I feel like this town already has so many issues with budgets, and I just feel like this could create more issues, to be honest. That's my fear with this. And it's not that I'm not interested in planning for the future. I think, absolutely. And I'm sure Tom and I'm sure the council, I know that that's, part of what they do, there's no doubt about that. But I do fear that this could, and so I don't know. And I don't know if Tom, if maybe you can address, if I could through the chair ask, Tom, I'm just curious, like, do other towns do this? Is this common? I guess I just want to know more about it, about this 5-year.
Yeah, I think our capital plan is probably more robust than most, frankly. What's reflected here is actual practice, so I don't see it as additional work per se. As a practical matter, the appropriation of funds occurs for the first year of the 5-year plan. So though we show detail and budget estimates for all 5 years in the budget document, the appropriation request is limited to the first of those 5 years, kind of the next fiscal year. So I hear your point that that we could be held accountable should those change in the out years. But really what matters as regards the budget is the appropriation request, which is, again, is limited to the first of the 5 years.
Okay. That's helpful. Thank you.
Mhm.
Are there any other questions or concerns?
Allison, did you have your hand up or no?
No, sorry.
Nope. Okay.
Okay, we could scroll down. The change in 502.1.5 is, I mean, that's just language change, semantics. And I think the word "the" should stay in there. It says the budget summary shall state. It was just awkwardly worded in the original charter, but
Probably should be capitalized.
yes. In 502.1.6, this ties this back into the capital planning notion here as well. So the budget for all departments, including the Department of Education, shall include all proposed, and instead of just having it be current expenditures, it's expenditures and expenditures for permanent improvements and or investments in the town's physical assets. So we've got a total budget that Tom presents. This relates to the budgets for each of the individual departments, and it makes them consistent.
It's a question from Mike Wood.
Mike?
Yeah, just a quick clarification. What is the intent of permanent improvements?
I think it's designed to reflect the notion of a capital investment as opposed to something that's going to just be cosmetic.
Okay.
There may be a better way of saying it.
Well, maybe not. It's just that I think throughout the document, throughout the charter, when this is all shined up, I think it might be beneficial to have some sort of space dedicated to a definition of terms that we use throughout the document. Just so, when folks read this later on, they know that a permanent improvement means exactly what you just said.
Yep.
Okay.
Mary?
I just had a question. I didn't know, and how is this different from what it was before?
Let me see if I can
And-
find the four
And I
language.
just want to, and what is the I just wonder what is the reason for the change, I guess I would want to know.
The original language said the budget for all departments, including the Department of Education, shall include all proposed expenditures, period. And then it goes on the town council. So as Tom said, what the budget for the town and the board will have the current year spending, but also the 5-year projections of capital improvements. What this says is that the budgets for the individual departments will reflect that same structure. Current expenditures and then 5 years. That was the intent, was to just make it parallel.
Okay.
I mean, I'm not even sure why why this section is in the charter, quite honestly, because the budget for the departments is irrelevant because it's all in Tom's budget. But we have it broken out, so we thought maybe it should be consistent and parallel. Tom, did you have anything else you wanted to raise on that?
No, I mean, there's other ways to, I think, get there. After the existing language, it ends by saying shall include all proposed expenditures. You could say comma, including operational and capital expenses. I mean, the notion is you want to make sure the capital piece is recognized here. But Mary's point's well taken. All proposed expenditures, it doesn't differentiate. An expenditure could be either one. Might be easier just keep the language the way it is.
Yeah, I'm comfortable with the way it is, because as I say, I don't think this has much operational effect, really. It's your budget is the only one that matters anyway, so.
Yep. So committee, you could take that under advisement when you come to taking motions. You could perhaps consider not accepting this, which would effectively go back to the existing language.
Yes. Okay.
I don't know.
Those, I believe that those were the only ones that relate to the capital budgeting process and plan. The next section in 503, we can deal with separately.
Okay.
All right. So what we've got then is the changes that are in 502.1, 502.1.2, and then 502.1.6.
Are you inclined to accept 4 different motions, each of those proposed changes?
That's what we've been doing. We've done each section.
Okay. And then maybe it'll make it easier, I think, to follow if we do it that way.
Okay.
So could I have a
I
motion?
move the adoption of 502.1.1 as presented.
I'll second that.
Yeah.
Is
Just
there any-
before Mike Wood gets in.
Oh,
Is there any further discussion about 502.1.1?
I see no hands raised.
Okay. Tony, could you call the roll on the the motion?
Sure. Mary Starr,
Yes.
Allison Bristol,
Yes.
Annalee Rosenblatt,
Yes,
Mike Stevenson,
Yes.
Mike Wood,
yes.
Karen Shoup,
Yes.
and Richard Siltman.
Yes.
Thank you.
so I will move the adoption of 502.1.2 as presented.
Is there a second for that? I'll second it. Is there any discussion or concerns, questions further about it?
Just to be clear, there is some language shown here that suggests it's new, but as we discussed, the middle portion, there's a couple of sentences that will remain.
The last sentence stays.
I think it's the second sentence.
And the second sentence.
Yes.
Correct. So this sentence stays
Mhm.
That's current, yes,
and this
it's current.
stays.
Yes.
No. I think it's, well, what about the any cash I'm sorry, I didn't raise my hand. The any cash contribution sentence, isn't that the core of this?
Right, that's part of what's new.
Yeah, Allison, I
This
introduced it.
stays from the last version. I'm sorry.
Yeah, he's highlighting the current.
I introduced it kind of backwards. You're correct.
Got it.
Oh,
Seeing no further questions, Tody, would you like to call the?
Mary Starr,
No.
Allison Bristol,
Yes.
Annalee Rosenblatt,
Yes,
Mike Stevenson,
Yes.
Mike Wood,
Yes.
Karen Shoup,
Yes.
and Richard Siltman.
Yes.
Motion passes. Thank you.
So I will move the section 502.1 part 5 as presented.
I'll second that.
On that, I don't think that was transcribed correctly from what we had put in Annalee. I believe the should remain in.
Yeah.
It should, yes,
Yes.
for the whole
So-
sentence.
Yeah, so it would be the budget summary shall state separately the amount to be raised. Is that clear to everybody? Okay,
Yes.
just done. Okay, good. And are there any questions about this? Okay. Tody, would you?
Mary Starr,
Yes.
Allison Bristol,
Yes,
Annalee Rosenblatt,
Yes.
Mike Stevenson,
Yes.
Mike Wood,
Yes.
Karen Shu,
Yes.
and Richard Siltman.
Yes.
Thank you. Passes.
So I move the adoption of section 502.1.6 as presented.
Second.
Who
Get it on the
said-
table.
Mike Wood seconded?
Yes.
Now, this is the one that we thought
not
that
gonna keep.
we should reject.
Right.
Are there any further discussion or questions about it?
Mike has his hand up.
Yes. Richard?
Oh, I was like, I didn't see your hand on the list. I'm sorry,
Oh,
Mike.
Oh, that's
I
okay.
don't see your face on there anymore, so my apologies.
I was being lazy and just raising my hand in front of the camera.
Okay.
Yeah, could someone just offer me just a little bit more background as to why they might not be in favor of this? Why this change is not favorable?
Mike, I think you asked the initial question, what is permanent improvement? I think it
Right.
maybe introduces some ambiguity that isn't necessary.
Okay, all right. So if that's brought about some concern, then, all right, I understand now. All right, thank you.
I think
anyone-
also, Mike, back up in section 502.1.1,
Yeah,
we really have the meat of what has to happen.
okay.
The budget has to include all of these things. And
So if we-
whether we have it in the department budgets, that's sort of largely irrelevant.
So it's essentially redundant.
Yes.
Thank you.
Mike Stevenson, you have your hand up?
I do. Given in that earlier discussion, we wondered about the validity of the change, but didn't we also touch on the validity and the value of the whole 502.1.6? And given that 502.1.1 covers everything, at least at the very top level, I mean, do we need this in at all? And I'm only throwing it out there because we're going to have to vote on something.
There's more in there than just that first sentence. Right, and if we go down, it says that, this is the only place where it says the town council shall make
Okay.
appropriations, so.
Okay, got it. Yep.
I mean, I agree with you that the first sentence is largely irrelevant, but the rest of it, I think this is the only place it appears.
Okay.
So if the whole sentence is irrelevant, should we get a motion to amend? Should we amend my motion to exclude well, no, never mind. Forget that question.
Mike Wood, you have your hand up again, Mike?
Yes, I think I might be on the same track as Annalee, but if we reject the change, what was the original language? Maybe that first sentence. What would that first sentence originally have said?
It said the budget for all departments, including the Department of Education, shall include all proposed expenditures, period.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that.
Mike Stevenson, do you still have your hand up or is it a new question?
No, sorry.
Yeah, I would just observe, though the sentence doesn't seem necessary, seems kind of obvious. I don't think it does any harm either.
So look at
Agreed.
501.
So
501.1.
what we have on the table then is a motion to approve the red lines that are in 502.1.6.
Right.
Is there any further discussion or questions about that?
And not to guide your vote, but if your intent is to revert back to the original language, your vote would be no.
Right.
Thanks, Tom. Okay, seeing no further questions or discussion, Tody, would you call the roll on this?
Sure. Mary Starr,
No.
Allison Bristol,
No.
Annalee Rosenblatt,
No.
Mike Stevenson,
No.
Mike Wood,
No, thank you.
Karen Shoup,
No.
and Richard Siltman.
No.
Motion fails. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Now, 503 was a different issue. This relates to this question about when the council receives the budget and when the clock begins to tick. And then it also relates to the question about what happens if the council does not approve the budget. So on that, Tom, did we, or Annalee, did we agree to take out the first sentence?
Yeah, I'm kind of looking at that now on the original one. To see why this is red and scratched out, because it's the first,
I don't think it should be. I think it should be
yeah,
not redlined out.
because the current one starts with the town council.
Yes.
Mhm.
So I don't know why this is lined out, that's all.
I'm not sure.
Who put it together and sent it to Tody? I didn't do
I
it.
think I got it from you, Annalee.
Me?
Yeah. Mhm.
Okay.
I got it from you.
I don't know why that is.
Regardless, I think the subcommittee's recommendation was to have that sentence be included in the charter. And that goes back to this issue about receipt of the budget, which is redlined in the title of section 503.
If you look at the minutes, the motion, I think, is correctly stated, which looks a little different than this.
This language was introduced by prior subcommittee work, if that helps clarify. It's not
Oh.
original language.
It's old then. Okay.
Yeah. Well, part of this process that we've undertaken some
Yeah.
weeks back.
Yeah. Yeah, I just don't remember that we did that on our follow-up meeting last week.
You know, there was some discussion, remember, about having the language about receipt of the budget in section 502.
Yep.
And this was Betsy's concern about the COVID issue and so on.
Yep.
And Tom indicated that 502 was really about the town manager's responsibilities and obligations. And so then we talked about moving it to 503. And this is the way it would read if it were in 503. Is the town council would receive and adopt the budget, which is the title of the section. And it would be following submission of the budget by the town manager pursuant to 502.1. The town council shall vote to receive the town manager's budget. And then thereafter, it shall review the budget and adopt it within 60 days.
I believe you're correct. I look back at my notes. I believe the subcommittee did want to keep that new language in that first sentence.
Yeah,
I
that's
see,
what my notes show too.
I see Mary Starr and Mike Wood.
Mary?
Oh, well, I had thought, I was just remembering our discussion, and I thought that there was discussion about not wanting this sentence, among the whole committee, because they had to vote to receive the budget. And what if you had a council that, I don't know, to me, it seemed, that's what I thought. There was some discussion about that. There was some issue with the voting to receive the budget, but that was my memory, that there was issues with that as well.
Amend.
Mike Wood?
Yes, yeah, Mary's correct.
Receives.
I kind of favored this in some ways, but I do remember the conversation that many contributed to about some caveats to this. Certainly, you could potentially have a town council that, for no other reason, just continue not to vote for the purposes of officially receiving the town budget, and would be in the form of some sort of filibuster. But I guess I'm having a hard time imagining that would be the case. So my hand originally went up just to confirm, and I think I heard it following the previous conversation, is that we did want this language originally, and I'm not saying that it's approved in any way, shape, or form, but following submission is an idea from this committee that is going to be considered.
One of the things that, if you read the language that starts with the town council,
Yeah,
it says the town council shall thereafter review the budget. And thereafter isn't defined. I mean, thereafter what?
well, thereafter the time that they vote to confirm.
Yes, but I mean, in the original language, Mike.
Oh.
And so you would then go back to 502, and thereafter then is really modifying or reflecting back on the submission of the budget, if you take these things in order.
Right, okay.
And so this just makes it clear as to its, what the thereafter references. It's the submission of the budget and the vote. Now, what we could do is not have the vote. It says, it could be, right now what it is, it's following submission of the budget by the town manager, the town council shall thereafter review and adopt it. And that's current practice. But then the issue is, what is submission?
Yeah, Mike, said another way, I think it's just defining the trigger point. When does the 60-day clock start?
Right. I mean, we can go through several different scenarios here. I mean, town manager submits a budget to the town council. The town council is split as to whether they're favorable about the presentation. They would have to vote. They would have to vote in the affirmative for them then to move on to the next process. Otherwise, it would go back to the town manager. I mean, right?
I think so.
I mean, you could go through a whole 3, 4, 5 hour presentation of the budget, Tom.
Mm-hmm.
And if the town council just wasn't singing to your tune, they could vote no. We're not receiving this.
They certainly could.
I'm not necessarily saying that's a bad thing per se, in a worst case scenario. So I'm not opposed to this check and balance. I know it can be abused.
I mean, frankly, all of this is much to do about nothing. Once the council receives it, it's up to them to do what they want to with it. So if they didn't like it, they're charged with adopting something that is acceptable. So,
but I don't mean to dominate the conversation certainly, but wasn't part of the contention that once you present the budget, then the 60, regardless of whether the town council is enjoying it or not, the clock begins.
That's correct.
So is this not, cannot one argue that this is a check and balance as to, well, we're not going to start that clock. We're going to go back and we're going to work a little bit harder or sharpen our pencils or whatever we need to do to make another presentation. Wasn't that the concern?
I think it was more the starting of the 60-day clock, Mike.
Right, exactly.
And
Does
so,
it start?
So by voting negative,
well,
the clock is stopped. The clock is not started.
that's correct. Under this language, that would be right.
Right, and that was the concern. That was the interest. The interest was having a mechanism to not have the clock start, if I may say, automatically, just simply because the budget has been put on the agenda and presented. There's another step. The council has to vote.
That's right, Mike. And you might recall your time on council, the way this language was written with 502, that clock started upon my submission, the night I made the presentation.
Right.
And the COVID year brought this issue up to some scrutiny, and the council wanted to make sure they had as much time as possible, given the uncertainties that we were under. And they did go back to the town attorney, and this whole notion of council taking action, there's a difference between my presentation and the council's actual action to receive it. So that's where this came from. I wish Councilor Gleistein was here to
Right.
argue on behalf of this. It's her idea.
So I wonder, if I think back in my time on the council, and of course, I have all the empathy in the world for the folks that have been serving during this COVID time. Comparatively, my time was easy. But if you presented the budget to me and I understood that once you walked out of the building, the 60-day clock began, I would make a motion as a counselor to say that I make a motion the 60-day clock not begin. You know what I'm saying? I mean, I don't think there's any rule against my introduction of recognizing a unique circumstance. I'm not 100% clear on that, but I think I would make an attempt to do that.
But you would be in violation of the charter.
Right.
Right.
Because the charter says you have 60 days from the submission. So if Tom has submitted it to you, you can't say I want 90 days.
Right. Anyway, I think I've used enough time, sorry. But thank you for that clarity. So, in the unique case of the last year, I like this language, but I would hope that it would be so unusual that it would be necessary that I wonder whether it's even necessary tonight.
If you can't see Rich, Jean Marie has her hand up.
Thank you. Jean Marie?
Yeah, I'm sitting here, listening and whatever, and I'm totally confused by this section. I don't know why we need to. The manager submits a budget. We got 60 days to do something with it. So it's like, get cracking. We can turn the budget upside down. We can rewrite it. We can do whatever. But we got 60 days to do it. So I think this is a bit extraneous here. But that's my opinion. We welcome yours.
Of course you do.
What did the attorney say, Tom, when the question was asked of him? Remind me, I know you told us once.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I recall exactly what question was asked and therefore what answer was given.
Okay.
But I think it was, he drew a distinction. Jean Marie, you might, it's escaping me right now, Annalee.
Okay.
I don't remember this conversation at all, to be honest with you, but that's because, I'm one of these people that wants something. If it's not that important, I forget about it. But the town council review budgets, we got 60 days. If we don't adopt it, the non-board within 60 days, then it automatically becomes the budget for the fiscal year or is otherwise provided by state law. That section right there, whatever the manager provides shall automatically become the budget. To me, is as a counselor, is I don't want the manager's budget necessarily to automatically become adopted. You know, there has to be work done on it.
Before we get on to that one, Jean, let's put that aside for a moment.
We
Yeah,
changed
but
that.
that has to do with the whole thing here.
No, but I mean, I think the question in the first sentence
Yeah,
really relates to the start of the 60-day clock. If everybody's comfortable that we know when that clock starts currently,
yeah,
this language is useless, right? I mean,
exactly.
we've been operating for years. As I said, Betsy brought this to us. She said there was a lot of confusion this year. Annalee and I didn't know much about what was going on, so we said, fine, how can we solve it? And this was the language that she proposed to solve it.
Well, I've been on the council now for what, 7 years, and there's never been any confusion in the 7 years I've served, so.
Again, under normal situations, these timelines have never been an issue. It was the uncertainty of the COVID spring that raised these issues. As I said, historically, I would submit the budget and the council would actually do first reading that same night. 3 or 4 years ago, council said, I'd like a little more time. I don't feel comfortable voting on the very night I see it for the first time. And so we've been separating submission and first reading by a week. This actually introduces another step that the council needs to vote to receive it.
But Tom, you had no authority to extend beyond 60 days from submission. So if you submitted it and then the council said, we're not going to accept it until first reading, which is a week later, there's nothing in the charter that gives you authority to do that. This is exactly what, that situation is exactly what this language is designed to address. Right, submission, if the council interprets submission as being first reading and it says that's the interpretation, then you're fine. But if you give them the budget and you submit it, that starts the 60 days.
No, I was just saying that the historical practice was the council actually took first reading action the same night that the budget was submitted to them. And that changed 4 or 5 years ago to separate it by at least a week, if not 2.
But I mean, but this raises the issue, right? I mean, exactly the question is, if you've submitted it, then that's when the clock starts. And if the council wants to take 2 weeks, then that's coming out of the 60 days. They don't get to take 60 days plus 2 weeks.
That's correct. The council's going to have a full, rich discussion on this.
Yeah.
So,
Mike, you have a question or a hand up?
Yeah, benefiting from the conversation, it seems to me that it is unnecessary. I'd like to think that the last 24 months, 12 months, 18 months is so unusual that this is not necessary. And then, I mean, when we say submission, it's not like the town manager is going to put them in brown envelopes and drop them off in the town council's envelopes and call that submission. We're talking about submission during a formal meeting, town council meeting. If I was a chairman and I was really unhappy with the progress of the budget, I would refuse to put it on the agenda. So there's ways to delay submission. So I'm not going to be in favor of the change, but I do appreciate the conversation. I think it's a good one. Thank you.
Which part of are you just talking about the one sentence for clarity?
Yeah, the one sentence. Yeah, the one.
Okay.
Yeah, following submission sentence. Yeah.
Jean Marie, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I mean, and the other thing, the bookend on this whole process is that as a council, we are under the gun, so to speak, to get the school portion out and done because of the vote that occurs on the school portion. And the vote's on the, I can't remember, it's the first or second Tuesday of the month in June, but it usually lines up also with state elections, primary
primary.
elections, referenda and whatever. So, we can't be messing around with the budget. I mean, I suppose we could, there could be a council that would, but I find that hard to believe. I find that very unlikely, so.
Okay. Any other questions about the first sentence?
Richard, I would say the first sentence and the title, adding the words receipt and,
Thank
they're
you.
kind of interrelated, right?
Yes, they are, Tom. Does it make sense to have a motion to accept the language receipt and the first sentence, and then we can vote on that issue?
Sure.
Yeah, that might make it easier. So since this was our subcommittee, I would move to amend section 503, the title and first sentence as proposed.
Second for that?
Yes, I'll second it.
Okay. Thanks, Mike Stevenson. All right, we've had a lot of discussion. I don't know if there's any more that we have to have. If there is, please feel free to jump in. Hearing none. Tody, would you like to call the roll on this one?
Mary Starr,
No.
Allison Bristol,
No.
Annalee Rosenblatt,
No,
Mike Stevenson,
Yes.
Mike Wood,
No.
Karen Shoup,
No.
and Richard Silkman.
No.
Motion fails. Thank you.
Thank you, folks. Now, the next red lines that are in 503, these relate to what budget goes forward in the event that the council does not approve first the town portion of the budget, and then secondly, the school district or the school board part of the budget. As you remember, we had a lot of discussion about this last time. And I think Nick took some sense of the committee in terms of how people felt about this issue. What the original language is in the charter currently is, of course, if the town council fails to adopt the budget, then the budget proposed by the town manager goes into effect. This language that's modified, the red line, says that if the town council fails to adopt the town portion of the budget, the non-Board of Education, then the last approved budget of the town council goes into effect. And then it also states that in the event the town council fails to adopt the Board of Education budget, then the budget of the Board of Education shall be determined by the process provided by state law. It's not a budget provided by the state law, it's the process provided by state law. And it's a fairly lengthy and detailed process. I know Annalee took a long look at that. So that's what this red line language says. And Allison, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I have two comments in the sentence, the non-Board of Education components of the budget last approved. Is that kind of, I mean, I understand the choice of those words, but is it a little bit convoluted? And would it be cleaner to say components of the budget of the current fiscal year? One assumes that that fiscal year, that budget would have been approved. And then my other question is in the last sentence, is the town council shall fail to adopt, is adopt the right choice of words because the Board of Education budget goes to referendum. So fails to approve, or, I don't know if adopt is the right word.
Mm-hmm. The wordsmithing on the current fiscal year may be a little clearer. I believe the current language has adopt as the But I don't have a draft of the current charter right handy, so I can't look at it. Let me see if I can find it in my
Oh, I
notes.
I have it.
It doesn't, it says adopt, but, and it doesn't separate the two budgets out.
While we're looking at that, Mary, you have a question?
Yeah, I guess, yeah, I appreciate the work of the committee on this, but I guess I don't understand the need for it. I kind of, from what I'm hearing, there's a reason for this, kind of, this is the teeth, so that the council says, yeah, we want to work on this budget. So that part I don't quite understand. And then the last part, if it's state law, then I don't know, it doesn't seem like we need to put that in there, because if it's state law, we go by state law. So that feels a little redundant to me, just because of course we're going to follow state law. So and we don't tend to put other state laws, other things in there if it's the law. So I just feel like,
Well,
yeah,
I think
personally, I would just probably leave it as it is, because I think it takes apart what the purpose of the language is, and I think it muddies the water. So.
Allison, do you have your hand up still? You have another comment to make?
Yeah, well, what I was going to say is I think the point in adding the language is that the current charter says that if the council fails to adopt the budget within 60 days, then what's presented becomes the budget, if I'm not mistaken.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I think that the point of the language is to not have what's presented necessarily become the budget, but to go back to the last budget approved, or one would assume the current budget. And then with the Board of Ed, there is some language in the current charter that says, or as otherwise provided by the Board of Ed shall automatically be, well, it says town manager and by the Board of Ed shall automatically become the budget for the fiscal year, or as otherwise provided by state law. So I agree with crafting something that retains the current budget if the council does not approve the budget that's submitted, versus automatically having the submitted budget become the budget.
Lee?
I think I was going to say the same thing, that was the major change, and that was the major consensus of this group. And maybe the other wordsmithing wasn't quite necessary, but that was the key change. Nothing else really changed.
Mike, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I would agree with the last two comments. I think this is an improvement. I like the fact that should we not, in the unlikely event that we not adopt a budget, it reverts back to the last democratically elected, if you will, or processed budget. As far as the language at the end provided by state law, I agree with Mary in that it may not be necessary in one sense, but in another sense, I like these kinds of documents to be very easy to understand and read and kind of hold one's hand through the process. I for one, certainly need that guidance. So I'm not opposed. I don't think it's overly verbose. So I'm not opposed to having that language in there, even though it's obvious that we would revert to state law.
Mary?
Yes, yeah, I respect what everyone is saying, but I guess my fear is that, so if you don't approve the budget within that 60-day period, it goes back to I just want to make sure I'm clear. It would go back to the budget that was approved a year prior. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So, and to me, if that's the case, if you have a council that just wants to spend no money, then this town would be really hamstrung, because as we all know, things go up every year, and I know, like, maybe that's like worst case scenario, but I don't know, for me, I kind of have to think that way. that if you had a council that just really didn't want to increase the budget at all, that's the way to go. So it does, to me, it changes the complete purpose of this, and it just doesn't. I mean, I'm all for the democratic process. It's not that I am trying to, take away that, but at the same time, I would worry, because I think the point of this is that you want the council to work on that 60-day period. You want them to put their stamp on it, because that's what we all want. We all want, we want, of course, the staff does an amazing job creating the budget, but we also want our democratically elected leaders to look at it, as town, as members of the town, to to say what they think should be in there. So for me, it doesn't make sense to me.
Mike, you had your hand up, and then Allison and Mike Stevenson.
I'm sorry. Was I next, Ma?
I thought I saw your hand up first,
Yeah,
Mike.
yeah. I was just making sure I was staying in order. Yeah, Mary, through the chair, Mary, you make a great point. But conversely, on the other side of that argument, I mean, we've been blessed, frankly, with outstanding town management for the last several years. But there could be a time where we would have a town manager that would submit a budget that was just outrageously expensive. It wouldn't be adopted by the council, and therefore we would have to adopt it. So this, you can look at it in both ways. In one way, we wouldn't want to adopt last year's budget because we know certain things are unavoidable as far as expenses go. But on the other side, I don't want to adopt a budget that was submitted by a town manager that may be completely unrealistic. So, and I think these are really extreme scenarios that we're talking about, thank goodness. So I think we just have to consider both extremes, that's all. Thank you.
Mike Stevenson.
Yeah, I think my take on this is a bit like Mike Wood's. And I think what we're trying to do here is document a scenario that hopefully we won't encounter. But it strikes me that adopting the last democratically approved budget is the only way to go. I don't see how we can adopt a budget that hasn't been approved by the town itself in the event that the town council doesn't adopt what's being proposed by the town manager. That's as I see it anyway.
Allison, and then Annalee.
Yeah, I was going to just reiterate and totally agree with what both Mikes were saying, in that, I think the budgeting process this year is a good example where council set a goal of, no more than a 3% increase with the taxes. And I think on the administrative side that Tom and everyone did, their due diligence to make that happen. So it really was a collaborative effort. And I would agree, if we weren't so fortunate with the administration and the council that we have, it might be more contentious. So I think it's better to fall back on what's been approved previously. That's an incentive and an impetus to get a budget approved.
Annalee?
Yeah, I just agree with the last two or three people. I've nothing additional to say, except that the only people that answer to the voters and the taxpayers is the council, not the manager. And that budget has to be set by the people who were elected by the taxpayers, I think.
Leanne, I see your hand up as well. Leanne?
Just a question, and I've been muddling this around for a few minutes, but wondering if there shouldn't be some sort of fail-safe in here. I understand what everyone's saying about going back to the last democratically approved budget, but what happens if this goes on in sequential years? So the council doesn't accept the budget for 2022, 2023, 2024. Are we looking at a 2021 budget that we're going to have to live within for those 3 years because they've come under section 503? That does not feel appropriate.
Nor does that scenario.
No, I know, Mike, but again, we're looking at this and I wouldn't believe that this scenario was going to happen anyways. Both the council and the school board finance committees work so hard with administration. Great budgets have been brought forward. We've got great leadership bringing this, all the work that Tom has done has been great. I don't see this happening that we wouldn't get a budget passed by council, and it feels as though if we're planning for a worst case scenario, why would we not plan for a worst yet scenario? Do you know what I mean?
Sure.
Well, there's obviously differences of opinion here. Mike Stevenson, you.
I was just going to say that, Leanne, you've raised a great point, but equally, what if we had successive years of outrageous budgets from the town manager that just had to be adopted because the town council wouldn't approve them? We'd equally be in a mess at a different end of the spectrum.
Just
And
to that, and I'm sorry, I totally don't mean to interrupt, but shouldn't the finance committee be responsible for paring down a terrible budget if one came forward? And if they did not, wouldn't it be incumbent upon us as the voters to put in people who would do the right job for us?
I think you're right.
That's the point.
Mary, you have a comment?
Yeah, thank you. I just agree with Leanne. I don't understand the point of, okay, what if the manager puts forth a horribly high budget, but the council has 60 days to change it. So it doesn't, even if you had a manager that put forth a horrible budget, that can be changed. So to me, I don't think it's equal. I don't see those scenarios as equal, because that's what those 60 days are for, is for the town council to put their stamp on that budget. So I guess I don't like, but I understand, and that was basically my point as well, was what Leanne was saying, that the concern of having basically a budget that is the same as it was the year before, and not having the services that are needed for the town. So thanks.
Richard?
Yeah, there's Tom, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I did. I think I tried to make this point earlier. I think there's great wisdom and specific purpose behind the current language. And that is, and this isn't about me at all, it's that the conversation starts with the paid professional advising the council, as required elsewhere in this charter, what the needs of the town are to operate. I start the conversation, or whoever sits in my chair. Similarly, the duly elected Board of Education start the conversation where they believe it needs to be for educational purposes. And I think having the structure the way it is now, there's a distasteful consequence of inaction of the council. And that is, if you don't do anything, what the manager proposes and what the BOE proposes is what becomes the budget. And I think that's purposely, it's intentionally put there to motivate and to encourage the council to do its work and to adopt a budget that it sees as appropriate. So I think that this is constructed exactly to produce the desired results.
Does anybody have any other comments on this? I believe, like everybody, both sides of this, there's a lot of validity, and ultimately we're just going to have to vote on it and decide which way people want to come down on this question. Karen?
Curious how other towns do it. I'm in support of the change just generally, and I'm supportive of the final sentence as well. But after hearing Tom's comments and that, I'm just kind of curious how other towns do it.
Yeah, I don't know that there's an exact. I think everyone has a slight little variation, and what I just described is my interpretation of the legislative of the intent, which is to create a system to motivate all parties to do their part of the process as regards budget to ensure this town can continue to operate. So I'm sorry, I can't really answer that, Karen.
I mean, we know what happens with higher levels of government, right? I mean, if the legislatures, Senate, at the federal level or the state level don't pass a budget, then government shuts down. There is no fallback other than emergency services continuing.
Well, maybe
But I don't know how the other towns do things. Mike?
I was just going to kind of kid around, say we should put continuing resolution in here.
Well, I think the shutdown is the ultimate motivator. It's amazing how quickly those budgets get approved, isn't it?
Well, we've shut down quite a few times in the last 6 years.
Well, I don't know that you're going to come to any have a moment of clairvoyance and come to great resolution. So this is a matter that I assure you will be a hot topic among the council. So don't beat yourself up over it.
I agree.
With that, Tony, would you like to call the roll on this one? And what we're voting on now is the red language that Tom is highlighting. So this language has been moved and seconded, and now an affirmative vote is to include the language, and the negative vote is to go back to the original.
Mary Starr,
No.
Allison Bristol,
Yes.
Annalee Rosenblatt,
Yes.
Mike Stevenson,
Yes.
Mike Wood,
Yes.
Karen Shoup,
Yes.
and Richard Siltman.
Yes.
Motion passes. Thank you.
So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay.
Well, that finishes off Article 5. I think we were left with one item in Article 9, which was Section 907. And then there were a couple of small items in Article 10, as I recall.
Yeah, so my hosting duties, I was not prepared to take on. So allow me just to.
So Article 9, except for the one was the title, but then you have to go down to 903.1. Is the first, maybe the first change, maybe the only one. Let me see. No, then there's another little change later, but
907.
904.3 has a change from may to shall.
Yeah.
Okay, forgive me, where are we? Article 9?
903.1, Tom.
.903.1 here?
Yes, and this
Yes.
was a recommendation of the subcommittee, and it relates to a recall issue.
Yep.
And the subcommittee felt, I assume it was important to indicate under what conditions a recall could occur. And they've laid that out in this red line. I don't remember which subcommittee dealt with Article 9.
Yeah, Mike Woods, but Mary Starr, I believe you were the advocate for this language. Is that correct?
That's
Yes.
correct.
Yes. I can speak to it a little bit if you'd like.
So
I-
Mary, are you making a motion to adopt it then?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Second.
Okay,
So if you like, I can speak to it a little bit. I did look at a few other towns, and let's see, I think it was Yarmouth, Gorham, Kennebunk, Cape, and Falmouth, and they all seem to have language that was a lot more specific than our language, because our original language just basically said that they just needed to, anyone who wanted to start a recall just needed to have a statement of the reason or reasons for recall, and there was no, someone really could say any reason, like, and that recall could go forward. And of course, they have to get the 25 signatures. Of course, it's quite a high bar, obviously. But I thought, given that other towns do have much more language surrounding, the reasons for that. And also, I did hear from some community members that were interested in seeing more of that language in there. So that is why I brought that forward to the committee.
Thank you, Mary. Jean Marie, you have a comment?
Yeah, I do. I'm glad to see this language. I know I was pretty perturbed by the recall that happened in this town. I mean, I'll be the first one to tell you. And
First.
one thing that people forget is the people who are elected were elected by a number of people within town. And to remove an elected official who was duly elected by those who believed in whatever this person was doing, to remove them for a spurious reason or a specious reason, I think it's ridiculous. So I'm glad and happy to see that this is pretty clear. And it has to be something where the bar is pretty high, in my opinion, to remove a duly elected official. So thank you for this language, Mary. I would definitely, if this passes this committee, I'll be all over it with the council. So there you go. That's my opinion.
Mike Wood?
Yeah, thanks, Mary, for submitting this to the subcommittee and then to the larger committee. There are some minor language kind of fixes that need to be made here, but I don't think that's necessary in the motion. For instance, and should be an, et cetera, but I too agree with the previous speaker that we need stronger language here to set the bar as high as we all hope it should be and could be to unseat an elected official. So I'm looking forward and hoping that we can pass it here and that the town council can see their way through it also. So thank you.
Any other comments on this? Okay, hearing none. Jody, would you like to? call
Mary
the roll?
Starr,
Yes.
Allison Bristol,
Yes.
Annalee Rosenblatt,
Yes.
Mike Stevenson,
Yes.
Mike Wood,
Yes.
and Karen Shoup,
Yes.
and Richard Silkman.
Yes.
Motion passes.
So Tom, the next, oh, there it is, 904 plus
Mhm.
0.3, okay.
I'll gladly make a motion that we adopt the language as presented for 904.3.
Do we have a
Second.
Thank you. I don't imagine there's much conversation about this one. Does anybody have anything to offer on that? Okay,
Well, I'll
Jody?
just say that everyone understands that shall means must.
Yes.
You must be a registered voter. That's your intent, right?
Right.
Makes sense.
Well, that's not really what that qualifier refers to.
Well, not the registered voter, but shall means must.
Yes. Quick, call a vote.
Thank you. Jody?
Mary Starr,
Yes.
Allison Bristol,
Yes.
Annalee Rosenblatt,
Yes.
Mike Stevenson,
Yes.
Mike Wood,
Yes.
Karen Shoup,
Yes.
and Richard Silkman.
Yes.
Thank you.
906.2.
6.2, there we go.
Mary, was this another one of your committee's recommendations?
Yes, I was just looking at that one.
Mhm. This may be only just semantics to carry forward, what it means to schedule as opposed to call and hold.
Yeah, I think it's just language. Yeah, there's nothing, I don't think there's any change to that. Mike or Karen, I don't think there's any change to it. It's just language.
Correct. I think it's just a better way of saying the same thing.
Yep.
Really.
And any comments or questions about this one? Hearing none. Tony, would you like to go through the roll again?
Mary
So is
Starr,
the committee moving it? Sorry, is Mary and Mike doing the first and the
Oh,
second?
yeah, they could, yeah.
Okay.
So
move to
moved.
adopt-
Thanks, Annalee. I forgot that. I'm
Move to
sorry.
adopt 906.2, change as presented.
Second.
Mary Starr,
Yes.
Allison Bristol,
Yes.
Annalee Rosenblatt,
Yes.
Mike Stevenson,
Yes.
Mike Wood,
Yes.
Karen Shoup,
Yes.
Richard Siltman.
Yes.
Thank you. That passes.
907 was a discussion about the question of going to referendum on bonds and then how to deal with other kinds of long-term commitments, often in the form of leases or other kinds of interest in property or anything that requires a long-term financial obligation of the town. And there were a couple of issues in this. One of them related to the amount of money that would be the threshold. And I believe in the last meeting we had, we accepted the 600,000 from 400,000. I think Mike Wood did some CPI calculations and determined 600,000 was a good number. So we adopted that. But then there was a question about the language that was around this because the language doesn't read well.
Right.
And I can't remember, I mean, I know I put something together and I circulated it to Liam and to Tom and to a few other folks, I think Nick, and maybe Nick just didn't circulate it to everybody. But I think, Tom, do you have that?
I've seen it before. Did you do it?
I think it was discussed.
Yeah.
Was it? Okay.
I have it in my notes. It was supported by the full committee on April 8th.
Then we didn't get it in here though, for some reason, then maybe.
Just color
Well,
it blue.
it's on where Mary's looking. It is the page before. It says recommended language was supported by the full committee on April 8th. I don't remember seeing the email until you sent it to me tonight. I don't remember seeing that verbiage. I think Tom has the,
Just the language?
yes. Yeah.
My only concern is it's not substantive at all. It was only a question of reading it. If you read the language that is in there, it just doesn't make sense.
So it's just rephrasing, but it doesn't change the purpose?
It doesn't change the purpose at all.
So why is this here, just to vote on the rewording it?
Yeah, if we go back, Tom, could you go back to the other one with the red line? If you read it, I think you'll see that it just, you can't implement it. It says the town council shall submit orders of resolves authorizing the issuance of general obligations, securities of the town, or leases longer than 5 years, but then says in a principal amount greater than 600,000. Well, leases don't have principal amounts.
Right.
And so I think you have to separate the two. It's got to be issuance of securities and leases have to be treated differently. And then it says without any, these provisions shall apply whether or not the payment of the capital improvements is made in 1 year or more, but leases are made over time. So it just didn't work well as language. So what I put together was this, which says that the town council shall submit orders or resolves authorizing, and here's where the split is. The issuance of general obligation securities of the town for purposes and so on of a single capital equipment in principal amounts greater than 600,000, whether or not the full amount of such securities are issued in one fiscal year or over multiple years. So that's the first case. Or a lease of equipment, structure, or property for longer than 5 years, where the total amount to be paid by the town over the term of the lease is greater than $600,000. And then you're going to go back to the original authorizing to vote a referendum subject to the following.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it makes sense.
Much cleaner. Thank you, Richard.
Yes, Mike.
Thank you. Through the chair. Tom, have you had an opportunity to review it prior to tonight?
No, but I appreciate.
I mean, my concern is that, being one as yourself who actually has to work with these changes in this language, if you find any problems with it or any
No,
challenge.
what Richard's proposing certainly is much improved wording than the existing. And this introduction of lease, I think, complicated the existing language.
Mhm.
Okay. Okay, good. Thank you, Tom.
Allison, you have your hand up.
Thank you.
Yes, also a question, I guess, for the chair. On the period of longer than 5 years, and I'm thinking perhaps of leases. Do you have some examples you could share of leases, that would be $600,000 over 5 years? Or, what if you're leasing not just capital equipment, but, space also, how, if it would come to 600,000, or if you do 5-year leases for, real property?
Yeah, I don't have a good example. I believe this notion of lease indebtedness, if you will, came from members of the public. And it was really around conversation we had a couple of years ago regarding potentially leasing a community center. And there was some concern that could be done by council without voter approval. So I think that's the genesis of this. But practically speaking, we do not enter into leases that would trigger this.
What about the House of Lights? Is it shorter than that? Is it shorter than a 5-year lease?
It is, and
Okay.
I was involved in picking the 5-year. There's nothing magical about it. It just suggests something of long-term nature. It could be 7, it could be 10, it could be 15. But to me, 5 years or longer seems like a long-term commitment.
Yep.
House of Lights wouldn't trigger it for 2 reasons, term and amount.
Okay.
And I'm sorry, I should have raised my hand again, just for the sake of conversation, to have a, idea with the House of Lights. What's the term on that, and what would the total amount be? Roughly.
Yeah, they're 1-year terms, and it's 126,000 a year, something like that.
So a 1-year lease that's renewable for 5 years wouldn't come under this, even if it went over the 600,000, right? That would be a way around it, I guess, to have 1-year renewables.
I suppose.
Yeah, with options. Yeah,
There's consequences of such shenanigans.
yeah,
I
there are.
suppose.
There are.
Well, it also is not a long-term commitment either, right?
No,
You can
it's not.
walk away from it. So if the council doesn't like it the next year, they say no.
Right.
Yeah, and we took some liberties in terms of, trying to assess what the legislative intent of this section was. And it really focused on the title anyway, the indebtedness aspect. And then, of course, this lease issue was brought forward, and it seemed to fit here, kind of toward the same end.
So what should the motion be? The red language you have on the screen, or that other language you had up?
No one's moved anything, so.
Well,
it's
I want to,
pretty-
I want to do it. I just want to, which one are we proposing? This one here?
I think there's 2 pieces, Annalee. If we go back to the original, Tom, just for a second, there's a change in the title.
Right.
So that would be one part of the language. And then the second part of the language would be the new language that I proposed, and it would replace 907.1.
So I would move that section 907's title be changed as proposed.
I'll second that.
Is there any discussion on the title issue? Tony?
Mary Starr,
Yes.
Allison Bristol,
Actually, I had another question. I think it might pertain to the title, if I might.
You're voting.
We
Discussion's over.
started the vote.
discussion's
Well,
over.
my hand was up.
Yeah, and that's probably my fault. I didn't, you had put it up and I didn't see it come down and go back up. So I thought it was just still left up there. I'm sorry, Allison. If
So-
nobody has any objection, I mean, this is pretty informal. Is everybody okay with Allison asking a question in the
No.
middle of?
I
Thank
have
you.
no objection.
Thank you. Well, my question was, when we talked about this previously, I think I had asked Tom if a CEA was a long-term financial obligation. And so if a CEA over a long period of time exceeds $600,000, is that something that should be incorporated here?
Tom said no.
Yeah, I believe my answer was no at the time, and I think 9071 defines leases and general obligation securities in this context.
So we're saying that a CEA is not a long-term financial obligation? I must have misunderstood.
I think you could argue it is, but by virtue of the definition and detail provided below, I think this defines for itself in this context what is meant by long-term financial obligations, and those are general obligation securities and leases of a certain value and term.
One thing that we can do is continue on the roll call, start the roll call over just to make sure we get it right. And Allison, if subsequent to the adoption or denial of this, you could make a motion to include CEAs if you wished. Is it?
Okay.
Tony, would you like to, I'm sorry, could you start over on that?
Yes. Mary Starr?
I just want to be clarified. We're just doing the title right now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Oh, okay. Yeah. So yes.
Allison Bristol?
Yes.
Annalee Rosenblatt?
Yes.
Mike Stevenson?
Yes.
Mike Wood?
Yes.
Karen Shu?
Yes.
And Richard Silkman?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. And now can we have a motion on 907.1, the language that Tom has up in front of us?
I'll move that first so we can get that going. 907.1 as presented in front of us, but I'd like to get a copy of it so that I have it for the minutes, if I could, please.
Is that part of the motion?
What's that? No,
You
that's just a
copy?
side, that's a side statement.
You having a copy part of the motion?
No,
I'll second it to move it along. Is there any discussion further about this?
so as presented
I
by,
think Mike has his.
Yeah,
hand up.
well, I just want to say I appreciate it and thank you, Richard, for presenting that language, and I fully embrace it, endorse it. Thank you.
Now, Allison, is this where you would like to add, for instance, a
You have to,
lowercase c and then add another? Well, I guess we'd have to, you could move to amend this, or we could just do it subsequently.
correct.
Let's do it. All right, is there any further discussion about this one? Tony?
Mary Starr?
Yes.
Allison Bristol?
Yes.
Annalee Rosenblatt?
yes.
Mike Stevenson?
Yes.
Mike Wood?
Yes.
Karen Shu?
Yes.
And Richard Silkman?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Now, Allison, yes.
I'm sorry, I'm confused going back and forth. So, if I was going to make a motion to include CEAs, would that go in 907.1.1? I'm having a hard time following, the charter, the way it was and the way it is now.
I think it would go here, Allison, as a lowercase c.
C, yeah.
So it'd be a motion to amend.
All right, and I'll make a motion to amend 907.1 to include CEAs.
Can
Can
we
you
spell out
just describe for us, Allison, what a CEA is and what you're thinking?
Credit enhancement agreement, and I'm assuming that it would go under Part B of 907.1.
Would be small c. It'd
Small,
be a separate
yeah.
item.
Yeah.
Would you have a threshold? Is the 600,000 the appropriate threshold? Is the term of the CEA important to you?
I think the threshold is probably more important than the term. It's very hard to come up with a number. I mean, through you, Richard, to Tom, I didn't really follow the conversation, the council meeting last night on the public safety, the CEA for the public safety, but I think that was around 550, 75%.
That's correct.
For around 550 for, was it 20 some odd years?
Yeah, a 20-year term. And keep in mind, these are all estimates. They're based on a number of assumptions, future value of the building, future tax rates. So they are estimates at best at the beginning of these. But you're right, the estimate is about $550,000 over the term.
And would you categorize that as kind of an average number? It's probably a hard, difficult question. No.
No, the Downs has the potential of reimbursing $80 million to them.
Right.
So there are vast differences. I appreciate the spirit that you bring this forward, but these are extremely complex, and I just shudder at the thought of educating the public sufficiently to make an informed decision on these. It's hard enough doing it with 7 counselors, to be honest.
Right. And I appreciate that too. So I'm going to suggest stay with the 600,000 number. Or Jocelyn Place is another example. I'm not sure how that landed or if that landed, but I think it was under the 600,000 threshold. If I recall, I think it was similar to the old public safety proposal. So maybe to include it if it's over 600,000 in a 5-year period, which hopefully would give some kind of latitude.
So Jean Marie, you have your hand up.
Yeah, as a counselor who served again for a number of years in town, I would not support putting the CEAs under this. Again, I appreciate Allison's, where she's coming from potentially with this, but CEAs and TIFs are very involved economic development tools that we have in our toolbox as counselors. That have a lot of, actually, there's upsides to them at times, in part when you so-called put, and I'm going to give trying to explain it's hard, but when you put things into CEAs or TIF districts or whatever, you can so-called shelter some of that tax value. And just as an example, now, because of what we have done in Scarborough, we are now going to receive more money from the state for school funding. So that's just one small aspect. And I believe that the public has elected me and other counselors to have the knowledge to be able to handle CEAs and TIFs correctly. And if we don't, then, you're going to vote other people in. But I would not want to see it here and I certainly will push against it if it does get passed and comes before the council. So I'm just being honest with you guys on this one. I think it's a step too far.
Thanks, Jean Marie. Mike Wood.
I just think, with all due respect, it's not necessarily, I don't think it's appropriate, Gene, to tell us that you're going to push against it to kind of maybe potentially retard the conversation. However, I do agree with you. I don't think CEAs and TIFs do belong here. They're very complicated. And like Gene Marie appropriately said, they're very valuable tools to the town, and they're very complicated. And whether you've done one or you've done 15, trust me, I think you're working hard to understand each and every one, just like you did your very first time. So now, that being said, Allison, if you wanted to, in our next meeting, you have a means of bringing forth maybe a little bit more robust background and research. And you know, if this doesn't pass, if your motion doesn't pass, I would offer an opportunity to bring it up for reconsideration if I was presented with information that could potentially change my mind. But right now, I just don't think I have nearly enough to consider that this is worthy of inclusion. But thank you. Thank you, Richard.
No, thanks, Mike. Are there any other, do we get I think we got a second on this.
We did.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Tom, you have your hand up. Do you have something you want to add?
I'm recalling Mike Wood's most recent comments about trying to influence the vote before it's taken, but I would just remind you, this is a conversation I had with Nick McGee. There's a running list of kind of parking lot issues, things that the committee, for whatever reason, did not recommend specific language, but that Nick intends to communicate to the council in kind of a transmittal letter. So failing it, make a actual language in the charter, this could be an item that is conveyed to council that it's something that they should consider. Again, my point is not to skew your vote, but I'm just saying there's other ways to advance your thinking in that regard.
Thank you. Annalee?
Yeah, I stand corrected. I don't think there was a second to that motion, or at least I didn't hear it. So is there
I was
one?
going to ask. No, I didn't get a second either. And if it doesn't have a second, it fails.
I think I seconded.
You did? Okay.
You did? Okay.
Sorry.
Thank
Thank
you.
Is there any other questions, comments? As I understand the motion, Allison, and correct me if I'm wrong, it would be to amend 907.1 by adding a subsection C that would include CEAs with an estimated value of more than $600,000 over a 5-year period. Is that correct? Okay. Tony, would you like to call the roll on that?
Mary Starr,
No.
Allison Bristol,
Yes.
Annalee Rosenblatt,
No.
Mike Stevenson,
No.
Mike Wood,
No.
Karen Shoup,
No.
and Richard Siltman.
No.
Motion fails.
6, okay.
Now I'm going to try your patience just a little longer because there's only, as I understand it, there's only one other item in section or in Article 10. And that's the disclosure of interest. And the committee, the subcommittee has recommended 1009.2.
I put a motion to adopt this language.
Mary Starr, okay. First. And you seconding it, Mike, since it's your committee? Is there a second?
Yes, I'll second it.
Okay, thanks.
And I can speak to this one too, because this was one that I had brought forward to the committee and the committee approved. We had a discussion about this at the committee meeting. And my understanding is, right now with this language, if there is a conflict of interest, it can only be brought up if the person that has the conflict of interest brings it up. So if you're on a committee and you, as a committee member, you might know that someone else on the committee has a conflict of interest, you cannot bring that up. Only the person who has the conflict of interest can bring that up, and then it can be discussed and decided whether anything can be done about it. And I think Tom had shared with us that the council has policies that do cover this within the council, but I don't think there's any policies that cover that with the school board or any other committees. So I thought it was important to, to have a way that other members of council's committees or boards could bring forward a conflict of interest to have a discussion about it. So that was, and Leanne, maybe you can speak to this, and perhaps, my understanding was the school board did not have a policy like this.
Don't. So I think having the coverage cover is important.
I'm sorry, Leanne, you were hard to understand on that one. Could you repeat yourself?
Sure, I was gonna say, we do not have a policy that covers this. So I agree with Mary that we should have something that does, having it in the charter is the right place for it to be, so it's covering all bodies.
Allison, you have your hand up, or was it?
Oh, I'm sorry. No,
Okay.
didn't put it down.
I would just note, Richard, I don't believe that there's a prohibition for a member of the body to rise and state an objection. It's up to the balance of the body to decide on that. But so if that's true, what this language is really empowerment. It really underscores the duty and responsibility, if you will, of all board members to police each other, if you will. But conflict of interest, begins essentially the duty to disclose is of the person. I don't see any harm in adding this. I'm not sure that it's required. I don't think there's a prohibition against it, but certainly this would serve to empower and educate committee members that they can do this if they wished.
Thank you, Tom. Mike Wood, you have your hand up?
Yeah, real quick. Yeah, Tom said it all and said it right. Again, this document I think is more beneficial when anyone can pick it up and read it and come away with a better and fuller understanding of how we do business. And I don't think there's any harm in putting this in here. I think most of us might believe that, elected or appointed, that we would have this duty, but seeing it in black and white in the charter does empower folks and make it clear as to the town's interest in ensuring that this process is adhered and respected. So I embrace the change. Thank you.
Just on to the subcommittee, is there any issue in the next section? Is it consistent? I mean, 1009.1 says that the person discloses, and then the way it was originally said is a person disclosing shall recuse him or herself from participating. We've now added that you can be disclosed by another member of the body. Is there any other language change that we have to do to make those consistent?
Well, if I may.
Sure, Mike. I'm sorry. Yeah.
A question actually to maybe Tom through the chair is, I'm not so sure that every advisory and appointed body in Scarborough can be defined as legislative or judicial in its capacity.
In fact, most are advisory only. I think the appointed reference is potentially problematic here.
Okay, that makes sense.
Well, but it follows, though, it does follow from the section above it, right? Because it says any person elected or appointed serving on any body, committee, subcommittee, and so on. I think the language in the 109.3, the new 109.3, says that if you are in a legislative or judicial capacity, you have an obligation to recuse yourself.
I think
If you're
that's a
not,
separate.
Yeah.
But don't you see that as a obligation upon the individual itself, where 9.2 offers that opportunity to others?
That's what I was wondering about, Mike, whether or not we covered what we need to have. I mean, let's say somebody stands up and says, Charlie has a conflict. What happens next?
Yeah, well, they vote on it. If Charlie doesn't agree to the conflict, then I believe the board or the committee would vote on whether Charlie can be included in the discussion.
So it's the next sentence in 9.3 that begins with a majority of the other members will vote. That gets triggered by 9.2. I see what you're saying, Mike. I agree. I see that now. Yep.
Yeah.
The other interesting component here is that there's a duty to vote. Oftentimes,
Yeah.
you're a stated, most of the time, a perceived conflict, not direct communicate, the financial conflict can be used as a reason to avoid a controversial vote. And the remaining body, it's the duty of the member to vote, and the body can compel a vote if there's not valid reason for doing otherwise. I think the language works.
Yeah, it's
Are
good.
there any other questions about 9.2?
Mike still has his hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just stretching.
Okay.
Jody, would you be kind enough to call the roll on this one?
Yes, Mary Starr,
Yes.
Allison Bristol,
Yes,
Annalee Rosenblatt,
Yes.
Mike Stevenson,
Yes.
Mike Wood,
Yes.
Karen Shoup,
Yes.
and Richard Siltman.
Yes.
It passes. Thank you.
Okay, that takes us all the way through the document. I think going back to what Tom had mentioned earlier, I think Nick's intent is to have us meet at our next regularly scheduled meeting to make sure that we're all comfortable with the full revision of the document, and then to discuss the presentation of the committee's work to the town council. And I think he had 3 items in mind. Tom, correct me if I'm wrong here.
Mhm.
One would be a conveyance to the council of the new red line document with a cover letter that explains provisions in it. And then third would be a list of what Tom referred to earlier as parking lot issues that we would be recommending to the council that it look at, many of which we felt might be outside of our jurisdiction as a committee and not as a commission. So those may include things like having districts as opposed to all at large. And so that's what I think we would cover in our next meeting. Is that correct, Tom?
That is, and Nick and I think we'll collaborate with Tody and get you those documents well in advance of the meeting. So the expectation is you acquaint yourself with them, and ideally you would vote, and your work will conclude at the end of the next meeting.
Are there any questions about that or comments, discussion? Mike?
Yeah, if there any kind of like parking lot, if I can call it parking lot issues, such as, I think the document can be improved if it had like an explanation of definitions of terms and things of that nature. Would it be appropriate to kind of like suggest that and send it maybe to Tom or Tody or to Nick? I don't know, as opposed to a committee and a larger discussion.
I think that ought to be included in the list of items.
Okay, all right, good. So I'll think about that between now and our next meeting.
Allison, you have your hand up?
yes. Do we have a sense as to when this might be presented to council?
I don't. I'll have to look at the council schedule. I would expect if you conclude your work on the 24th, sometime in the month of July, we can accomplish that. The council has some work to do. For this to get on the November ballot, they will need to decide which of which of the items, if any, and decide on those ballots by what, the first week of September, Jody?
Yes, by the first meeting of September.
So July and August are challenging months for everyone, so there's some work to get done to meet that schedule. So
Thank you.
sooner the better, Allison, I think,
Yeah.
to get it to council.
Thank you.
So is a part of the process simply just a presentation by Nick, or will it be workshopped so there can be a discussion with the council about why some of these things were done?
That's up to Nick.
Yeah, I'll have to work with him. It would be a long presentation.
Right. That's what I'm thinking.
So it may be simply a transmittal with an offer to meet to provide, that could come at a later date. I'll think about that and work with him, and we'll report more fully at our next meeting. Okay?
Yeah.
Anything else for the good of the order?
Well done today, Richard. Thank you.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Mike.
good job.
Take a motion to adjourn.
I'll second that.
Okay.
Mary Starr,
Yes.
Allison Bristol,
Yes.
Annalee Rosenblatt,
Yes.
Mike Stevenson,
Absolutely.
Mike Wood, Karen Shoup,
Yes.
and Richard Siltman.
Yes.
Just
That
for
was
the record,
unanimous.
there is no one in attendance, so public comment, you're fine.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.